Julia, the US Centers for Disease Control says that there's a 50% lifetime risk
Mm-hmm.
of mental health problems.
Mm-hmm.
What on earth is going on?
I find that a really tough question to answer, but I'll do my best. I think that your standard reply on that kind of question would be that we're getting better at diagnosing it
Mm-hmm.
and that people are more likely to be coming forward about their mental health challenges. But I really feel like that can't possibly be the full story because it's implying that in the 1980s or the 1970s, that we weren't recognizing that people were struggling and that we would let them be and not talk to them. And I just don't think that's fair to, my parents or my grandparents to assume that that's how they were behaving.
Yeah.
So I think there's been a lot of environmental changes over the last few decades that could easily explain why we are more distressed than we were. And the way I think about it is that I think that we are possibly less resilient than we were. And an easy way to think about resilience and how that could have reduced over a fairly short period of time is that the food environment has changed so dramatically and drastically over a very short period of time. So, the rise of ultra-processed products in the last 50 years has been unbelievably exponential. And when you break down what happens as a consequence of the increased consumption of those foods, which is 50% of our calories are coming from those types of products. I think that's the UK data is around 50-60% of the calories are coming from those types of foods. Is that I think about them as there's three things wrong with them. One of them that you'll often hear people talk about is the sugar. And that's, fair enough. There's sugar. Another one that you might hear people talk about is the added things into it and that you end up with these cocktails that we are consuming at a really high rate that we're not used to dealing with. And that would be your emulsifiers and your preservatives and your colors and your flavors, all of those things that have been added to it to make it taste good.
Yeah.
And we're starting to recognize that in itself is having an impact on our microbiome, which then impacts your brain. But the third one that I think gets overlooked and not really talked about in the conversation, which is my area of research, is that it is the micronutrient content. And so the vitamins and minerals contained within ultra-processed foods is way, way lower than what you get out of real whole foods. And when you start to break down what do micronutrients do for the brain, and you realize that they're involved in everything, metabolic reactions, supporting your mitochondria, helping keeping your genes healthy, reducing inflammation, all of those things, when you start to unpack that, and then you're not consuming them from a ultra-processed type of diet, you start to realize that our tanks are empty to begin with. And then you start throwing stressors on there. COVID in New Zealand, it would be like earthquakes and floods and other environmental disasters. People have nothing to start with. And so I think they end up being far more stressed than they might have been had they started with a full tank.
Yeah.
How's that?
There's so much
but
to
there's
unpack
more
there.
to it than,
Absolutely, yeah. I really love this concept that you talk about quite a bit in your book, The Better Brain, about resilience. And, some of the analogies you've just spoken about there with the tank of fuel, not having a full tank, not having the ability to withstand stresses as much as we perhaps would have done 40, 50, 60 years ago and beyond. I'd love to unpack that a little bit more. So I totally get the food equation in that. There's been a drastic change in the way we eat, the timing of when we eat, the impact on our microbiota. What else is picking away at our resilience that is potentially leading to this increase in mental health problems?
What else might be picking away at the resilience? I think other ones that are obvious that are outside of the nutritional realm would be your rise in technology, social media. I'm sure you've had experts who can talk to the impact that those things can have on our overall resilience, and that they are, in a unusual way, reducing, I think, our physical social connections that you would get out of, meeting with people. And then if you're just always online, then do you experience social connections in the same way as we would? And we know how important social connections are for longevity, for quality of life, for having those support systems. Has that been eroded at the same time as our nutritional environment? So I think we have almost like this collision of disasters coming together to perhaps explain why so many of us are struggling with our daily living. And then, of course, you can look at sedentary lifestyles, and we're not moving enough, and we've lost touch with things like nature and green spaces and blue spaces, and you kind of look at it and you go, wow, we're not building up so many of these skills that perhaps our ancestors might have just naturally built up just as a consequence of their environment. I don't know if that's what you were thinking of.
If you think of like the inputs for a healthy brain, this is actually something that me and Dr. Drew talked about recently on the podcast, who I know you know well. We've taken away all those inputs, movement, exposure to nature, and we've added things like ultra-processed food and tech. One other thing that you mentioned in your book is polypharmacy, or the number of medications that we're now exposed to.
Yes.
And I wonder if we could talk briefly about that in relation to how that might be in some way impacting our resilience.
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's a good way to think about it, because I haven't thought about it in the perspective of resilience. But I think the way I would frame it is that the 1980s was a really exciting time. I did my first degree in neurobiology, and it was all about understanding neurotransmitters and dopamine and serotonin. And it was also the 1987, I think is the right year, where Prozac came on the market. So there was a real excitement around, we found the answer. I go into this field of mental health. I became, I was really interested in becoming a clinical psychologist. And I was excited about the opportunities that we had to maybe really make a big difference on people's lives. And that's, you've got this rise of excitement around the chemical imbalance theory. And that if you just give an SSRI, a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, it's going to influence the levels of serotonin, and then people are going to be fixed. And the same thing with dopamine, and just such an exciting time to have hope that we're getting to the cure.
Yeah.
And the sad thing is that it didn't turn out as well as we had hoped. But we ended up not realizing that until probably really recently. And there's now a lot of discussion around, was that really the right way to think about mental health issues? And it's more complicated than that. And it's not just about serotonin. And, it's about, that's just having a change, a chemical change. It doesn't cure it. It's not addressing the root cause. So we're starting to have those really, I think, important conversations. But when you have a magic pill available, we end up using it, and we end up using that as the first go-to. And we don't then allow people to perhaps heal in a different way, because they think about their mental health problem as being something like, having heart disease. It's, I have depression. So therefore I have to fix it with this pill in order to correct it, and that will fix it. And so we have a generation of people who think about mental health disorders as being fixable by that pill. And I think that took away their control. And I think it's taken away all of our control of thinking, you know what? There are things that you can do in order to improve your mental health problems.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But when we start with the pill, we take that away, I think. And so I think that's maybe what you're,
Yeah, I mean,
it's made me think about it differently.
No,
but yes,
absolutely.
I think it means that then we don't build up our skills to deal with mental health problems. So I like the way you're thinking about it.
I think just thinking back to my experience as an NHS GP for many years, the way we thought about medications was very guideline driven. It still is to some extent today. I'm really pleased to see a lot of practitioners across all different specialties thinking about medicine in a completely different way, from almost like a resilience mindset. But in the context of a short appointment and consultation, almost the demand from a patient in some ways to have a problem fixed, especially when you are fed this idea that antidepressants will anti the depression you have. It's no wonder the number of prescriptions for these kind of drugs have soared over recent years. And actually, in your TED Talk and in your book, you talk through some of the data around the increase in prescriptions, not just in the US, but also globally, right? And in New Zealand, which is
exactly. So it's like 17% of the adult population. It can go up to 20, 25, depending if you're female or not, and depending on what age band you're in.
Gosh,
so in
25%, one in four.
For yes, if I'm not sure exactly what age band it'll be, your older female, but yes, you've got a very high percentage of people on them. That doesn't necessarily mean that those people are well, though. That's the sad thing, is that when you dig into the data, and that's something that I've had the opportunity of doing with my own data, like just studies that we've done. And in fact, it's what led me to do what I'm doing now, is that do you want me to go into it?
Yeah, please.
Is that a good place to
go for it.
I mean, we're going to go a little bit off topic around your question, but maybe if I remember, I'll get back to it. So I started, I did my master's PhD in my professional training for becoming a clinical psychologist at the University of Calgary in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And I did my PhD not on nutrition at all. I did it on women with ADHD, so completely different topic. And but when I was doing my PhD, I with Professor Bonnie Kaplan, who I co-wrote The Better Brain with, she heard about some families who were in southern Alberta, Canada, just about 2 hours south of Calgary, who had discovered this idea that if you give people additional vitamins and minerals, you can make a huge, substantial change to their mental health status. And particularly what they were looking at was bipolar disorder, psychosis. So really serious, complicated mental health challenges that my training in clinical psychology had taught me could only be treated with medications and or psychotherapy, and that nutrition was irrelevant to the brain. I mean, that's the standard training that a clinical psychologist gets. It's the standard training that a psychiatrist or even medical professionals get, is that as long as you eat a healthy diet, whatever that thing is, I mean, we can unpack that.
Yeah.
But then you don't need to worry about that aspect, and it's not relevant, and it's not important to think about it that way. But these people were getting well and staying well with nutrients. And there's a long story about why they ended up giving that a go, because they had, long histories in their families of people who had mental health challenges, and conventional treatments weren't helping or helping those families. And so they decided to explore an idea, which is that when animals get very irritable, sort of your what might look like a kind of a manic or depressive type of state in an animal. I know it's a kind of a bit of a stretch, but that you give them a broad spectrum of micronutrients, and then they calm down. And that's what you do when you're a farmer.
And this has been known in
This is very well known in agricultural spheres. Yeah, they don't give them antidepressant, they give them nutrition.
Wow.
So they applied that concept to these families and to these children who were really struggling, and they realized that they were getting well. So rather than start a company that could, they just go and sell their product, which you can do as a vitamin and mineral. You go ahead and just sell it. Again, I'm happy to talk about that because there's a lot of crap out there. That they wanted scientists to study it. And so one of the scientists that they approached was Bonnie Kaplan. And so I heard about her getting, she was skeptical. She thought it was snake oil, but she saw their data. And one of the things that I learned from her and that I try to instill in my students is that if an idea completely contravenes your way of thinking, don't shut the door on it. Be curious. Be skeptical, that's fine, but be curious about it. And that curiosity could lead you who knows where. And that's what's led me to be here sitting and chatting with you about it, is that curiosity. So I ended up finishing my PhD. I went and did a postdoc at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto. And then this opportunity came along for me to move to New Zealand because they were looking for a child clinical psychologist to teach into the clinical psychology program at the University of Canterbury. So my husband and I were in our, early 30s and thought, why not? New Zealand, They speak English. Let's go there. And so we moved there. We agreed we'd go for a couple of years, and we're still there 25 years later. But I am going to get back to your question. And that is that I continue to do the work that I was involved in, which was in looking at gender differences in ADHD. And one of the things that I noticed in our data was that we were recruiting people with ADHD who were medicated. So they're taking the best of the best stimulant medication. And when you look at their scores on the measures of ADHD, they are still in the clinical range. And so they're still elevated, on average. Of course, there's some who will be within the normal range as a consequence of that. But on average, they're still in the clinical range.
So these are folks who are on meds. Yes. But are still having the symptoms.
Exactly.
Is ADHD specifically?
Exactly. Looking at ADHD symptoms. And so you need to, that should make us all stop and go, well, then it's not working. If you're not in remission, full remission, then that medication isn't working the way it should. Because I'd think if you're depressed on an antidepressant, you shouldn't be depressed. So going back to those stats of, 1 in 4, 1 in 5, a lot of those people are still depressed. And we looked at this within the context of a study we were doing on looking at the genetics of adverse effects and antidepressants. So we recruited people who were on antidepressants, but we were interested in side effects. But we also looked at their scores on depression, and a lot of them were still depressed. So I think we owe it to people who are struggling with mental health issues to be honest about these data, to recognize that not everyone gets well. And I always think it's important to say is that there are people who do really well with these medications. Okay. I tend not to see them. So they're out there. And they tend not to come to me or to our, they don't come to a clinical psychologist, and they don't tend to come to our studies because they're doing really well and they save lives. But we also have to be honest that not enough people are getting well, because if they were working the way they should, which is to put you into remission, we should not have that stat you told me at the beginning, which is half of people are going to have a mental health challenge. We shouldn't expect that if these medications are working the way they should. You should eventually see a drop in the number of people who are struggling because they take the pill and they get better. But what happens now is they take the pill and they don't always get better, and then they can't get off of them because of these challenges of the withdrawal. And, I certainly have personal experience of, I have my mother who's passed away now, but she struggled with anxiety in the 60s. And when that happens, you were put on a medication. And she could never come off of it. We managed to get her off of that with a lot of support with nutrition and things like that. But that withdrawal can be absolutely hideous
Yeah.
of coming off of these medications that people will put you on with absolutely their best intentions there of making you feel better.
Yeah.
So I don't want to be negative about the use of them, but one of the side effects is that it can be really hard then to come off of them, but also to develop other coping styles. So did I get around to, I think I did eventually
you did, definitely.
to answer your question, but I gave you a bit of my story as well about why I'm here. So
I want to dive into that actually a bit more about your background, but just before we do, I want to play devil's advocate. Imagine there was someone who is representing pharma sat opposite you right now.
Oh dear.
And I and my argument to you would be, well, whilst the data shows that people are still having symptoms, it speaks to how multifactorial mental health illness is. And actually, we're optimizing as much as we can with medications, but it's the other things, the lack of movement, the technology, the food, all the other things that are chipping away at people's resilience. And had we not been giving these folks the medications, they would be a lot worse.
I that's an interesting perspective. I disagree from having seen so many people who have embraced the lifestyle factors and really addressed them, whether or not it's changing their diet or it's getting them to move or it's getting them to, meditate or, all of these other opportunities that we have at our doorstep. I would say that I've seen far too many people do well, and also not just do well, but flourish. And I'm not convinced that with just the medication, people tend to flourish with that approach.
Yeah,
and there will
agree.
be some who do. Again, I don't want to minimize that, but I just don't. I've seen enough people in my career to know that, they often just kind of get by and maybe they can go to work, but they're not happy. Like, do they get to that kind of sense of purpose and meaning and feel energized and excited? I'm not convinced that happens. And it's not just from the people who I've met, but it's the stories the emails I've received for the last 2 decades. And it's, my father, my mother, my brother, my daughter, has been on these medications and they're still unwell. I mean, that's the kind of conversation starter that I get. And so enough of those, you kind of have to think, I don't know.
Yeah. I want to go back.
How was I on the devil's advocate?
Oh, no, absolutely.
I don't know.
I completely agree. It's just, I know the pushback that people will give to the idea that we shouldn't be prescribing as much in terms of mental health medication, psychiatric meds. Given it's such a complicated topic, I think it's always important to just draw out the nuance, even though I'm in complete alignment with you about the importance of movement and tech addiction, food, mindset. There's so many other inputs that we should be exploring before we even have the pharmaceutical conversation, because of some of the issues that we'll go into a bit later with withdrawal symptoms and the side effects and how that affects nutrients in general, how that feels about yourself, your affect. I mean, as in like your general sense of well-being and mood and your ability to interact with folks. I mean, this is all something that needs to be put into consideration. But in the context of an 8-minute consultation, when you're recognizing someone who's depressed and you want to give them a quick fix, it's we'll start you on... I am
sympathetic to that the system is broken. I'm absolutely sympathetic to that. And I'm also aware of studies that were done with children with ADHD where they if they gave them the behavioral interventions first before medication, they were far more likely to engage in that. But if you gave the medications first, they were less likely to engage in behavioral interventions. So we know that if you put the medication in first, then you may be less likely to engage in all of those other things. So I like to think about the medication as the supplement, and that, it might have a role. Yes, it's what a great, discovery and development and invention all of these medications are. But we put them first, and I would say let's let's not necessarily give them out first. Let's see what else we can do. I mean, I've done enough clinical trials now. The gold standard that people like to talk about, randomized controlled trials, where you randomize people to a placebo pill, or in our case, we give them micronutrients, but others might, you might have an antidepressant or whatever. I've done enough of those trials to know that the placebo effect is huge.
Yeah.
And that just that care of looking after someone, being interested, asking questions, and giving them something to swallow is sufficient for, in some of our studies, up to half of them get better that way.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I know, it's crazy. Exactly. And our placebo effect in New Zealand is getting bigger and bigger, to the point where I think someone else has to do my research, because they come into my office. I know, they're already better.
So your personal placebo effect
I think our placebo effect is going up.
Wow.
Yeah. And I think that that happens with medications as well. I think the placebo effect goes up because you have such high expectations, and that in itself is, it's like you're giving people permission to heal. We've just done a study with teenagers. I mean, I cannot believe I did a study with teenagers. When I look back on it, I go, what the hell was I thinking? 12 to 17-year-olds. And it was, and those data aren't published yet. So okay. I won't talk about what we found, but I'll talk about the experience. And that is that we found that these teenagers were, because we were giving them a pill, it was almost like we were giving them permission to behave, or something, that it wasn't that their parents were telling them that they had to, be less grumpy or irritable or have temper tantrums or whatever. There was something about that pill that allowed them to the permission to heal. I'm not sure, but it was absolutely fascinating, because we had a big placebo effect with those teenagers. And we were targeting teenagers with serious emotional dysregulation. Really? They were really irritable. They were aggressive. They were your teens that most people would not want to deal with. And we said, bring it on. Those are the kids we want. And yet, when we've looked at the data, we've certainly observed again that with teenagers, give them a pill, permission to heal.
And what's the scoop on that? Like, I know it's not published yet, but what was the intervention? Was it micronutrients?
The intervention was micronutrients and targeting emotional dysregulation. We've come to the conclusion that is the biggest effect of the micronutrients, is on dysregulation of emotions, which is a transdiagnostic concept, and it transcends across anxiety, depression, ADHD, ASD. It's at the core feature of so many of our challenges, but that's the kind of kids we were trying to capture. So they didn't have to come in with a diagnosis.
Gotcha.
What we wanted was that they were dysregulated.
Gotcha. Let's talk a little bit about your background, actually, Julia, because you mentioned you did your first degree in neurobiology in the 80s, and that you've been doing research. But what was going on in your timeline in between then? And perhaps we should unpack exactly what a clinical psychologist is for the listener as well. Okay,
sure. So my timeline: grew up in Toronto, which explains the accent, and went to McGill to do the degree, my first degree in neurobiology. It was one of these kind of, when you look back on it, a kind of a dumb decision as an 18-year-old, that I wanted to study psychology, but psychology was an art at McGill, and I had a scholarship to study science. And so neurobiology was the closest I could get to be able to do a bunch of psychology courses, and yet be able to keep this, very small scholarship. At the time, it must have felt like a lot of money. So that's what led me to do neurobiology. And then I took a year off and I traveled, and then I came back and I did my master's and PhD in clinical psychology. And so, and that's a standard way through to practice as a clinical psychologist in Canada and the US.
Gotcha. And so you don't prescribe meds?
No.
But you are part of the multidisciplinary team that would be looking after individuals.
Exactly. So clinical psychologists are the way I think about them now, and it's not how I would have thought about it at the time.
Oh, interesting.
But I see them as the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff.
Oh, wow.
And so we wait until people are unwell. I mean, I now think about it because I think about resilience.
Sure.
And so I think we can prevent mental health disorders in lots of people if they were more resilient. I think we would stop them from needing a clinical psychologist. And so I now focus far more on prevention. And I love to talk about that and what I'm doing in that space, and improving resilience in university students. So but a clinical psychologist would take people who are struggling with your, serious anxiety or mood disorders or ADHD, if it's children at the time, at least. That's more now across the lifespan kind of challenges, and help people through talk therapy to help them get better. And I think there's a lot of value there. There's a lot of value in talking to people and giving them other ways to think about their problems and challenging their thinking. And, a lot of clinical psychologists are trained with a cognitive behavior model, which is where you're looking at activation and also looking at thought processes and the way they think about problems, and getting them and their thoughts, and getting them to challenge them and see them in different ways, in the hope that that conversation and that changing the way they're thinking about it and their thinking patterns can alleviate distress. And we know that that can be incredibly effective. But now I think about it, is that we're waiting for people to get unwell, and then they get to see a clinical psychologist. You don't see a clinical psychologist as a preventative tool, although some clinical psychologists probably do go more into that kind of space. And it's so broken. It's like saying, let's wait for you to get your heart attack, and then we're going to do something about it. I mean, you guys would, as medical people, should think that's absurd, but that's what we do in psychology, is that we wait until people are unwell, and then we give them skills and tools. Well, why didn't we do that in school? Why didn't we give those skills to people when they go to university? Because university students, huge mental health challenges. Goodness, that's escalating and going up. So that's where I think we need to target our resources, to help people stop getting to the bottom of the cliff and then sending the ambulance there.
If you think back to when you were freshly minted as a clinical psychologist, what were your thoughts on multivitamins and micronutrients?
Oh, I would have thought they were completely a waste of time. Yes, a waste of your money. As I said, my training was your standard conventional training, which was that nutrition was irrelevant to the brain. And so if you were to tell me at that point vitamins and minerals would help alleviate distress, I would have ignored it. Yeah, I would have probably ignored it. In fact, I remember when I would go and talk to families about ADHD, because that was part of my research. And there were some families where they would tell me about diet and taking out the colors and some of the numbers, making sure that their kids didn't have exposure to them. And I just thought, what the hell? Like, why are they doing this? And now I realize they were really ahead of their time. These mothers who were looking at the food their children were eating to see whether or not that might be contributing to their behavior. And we now know how relevant that is to the expression of ADHD, for example. We know it's not everything, and it never is. I mean, it's not everything. And I certainly don't want to give that impression that this is a cure for everything. But it's such a big elephant in the room that we haven't been talking about, that I think there's so much opportunity, and it's such a low-hanging fruit opportunity, because it should be relatively easy to change. So yeah, I definitely was not embracing it at the time. But as I said earlier, when Bonnie started to look into this and she showed me the data, her early data, I was certainly intrigued, and I was like, well, I guess we aren't doing that well with our current conventional treatments. Why not give this a go? Why not do some clinical trials? because either I had nothing to lose, right? I either show it doesn't work, and then you'd think people would be really excited by that or interested and go, okay, it doesn't work. But if I showed it worked, you'd think the world would embrace it.
Yeah.
Well, they haven't.
Yeah.
But you would think that there would be great excitement about this opportunity of using nutrition to reduce or even eliminate mental health challenges.
Yeah.
Or even prevent.
Yeah.
You'd think that this would be big news,
Yeah.
but it hasn't been big news, which has really been a peculiar journey, but just how much opposition there has been to this idea.
Well, let's talk about this, because you've had, where sounds things, a decade plus of having to change your mind very gradually in the face of new data. And I want to give people a snapshot of that in the next hour or so.
Okay.
And I also want to give it to myself as well, because as conventionally trained medical doctor, practicing for over 15 years, masters in nutrition, my perspective on multivitamins is still such that I think they're useful for a very small slither of folks who perhaps are malabsorbing and don't have a very good diet. So it might be a good insurance for them. But actually, we should just be getting people to eat healthy as much as possible. And in the realm of cancer prevention, cardiovascular prevention, even mental health issues, my perspective is I don't really know of the data to suggest that they're useful looking at large cohorts. So we've been dancing around this. So let's dive into it.
And I'm happy to. I'm
me.
happy to. And I do want to preface this with a few things that I think are important for your listeners. One of them is that my research is proof of principle, which is that our nutritional environment is not adequately meeting our brain's needs at the moment. So that we currently have a mismatch between what our brain needs and what we're consuming. So the diet studies are very hard to do. People know when they've been randomized to broccoli, right? or McDonald's or whatever it is. So diet studies are incredibly hard to do, and people will tear them apart because they can't be blinded. So I see my research as sitting within that realm of being able to do placebo-controlled trials, the gold standard pharma-like trial. And my trials are done exactly like that, like a pharmaceutical company would. That we are proving through our research, when we show that the nutrients outperform placebo and we maintain the blind, and we put some riboflavin into the placebo so that changes the color of the urine, so no one can guess on what condition they're in. There's not a lot of side effects, so you can't guess based on side effects. That when we show that the nutrients are better than placebo, that actually is saying that there's something wrong with our food environment. So I always want people to understand that that my clinical trials should be seen within that context, that there's something wrong with the food environment, that you're not getting adequate vitamins and minerals from your food. So I first want to say that. The other thing I want to say is that as a consequence of my research, I'm not here to supplement the world. I'm here actually to say we need to change the food environment. So I'm completely on board with you in that food should be first. But I also know that there are people who have incredible diets, really good, or not incredible, but really decent diets, the ones that you might recommend, who still benefit from the vitamins and minerals. And we've never been able to show that diet quality is impacting response. So people of poor diet quality and good diet quality still seem to benefit from this intervention, which is a curiosity.
Really?
I know.
Okay,
it's a curiosity.
That's very interesting.
And so that deficiency thing, I'm going to challenge you on. And that you have to be deficient to benefit from additional supplements, because I really do want to talk about that. And the third thing I want to say, so food first, I think it's proof of principle. But the third one is that I am not paid by anybody to do this research. And so I think that's important too. So the companies that make the products have never supported it financially. They give the product, the nutrients and the placebo for free for us to run clinical trials, but they never tell us what to do. And they don't learn about the results until I present them at a
Gotcha.
conference or publish.
Okay. Right.
So just to make that really,
No,
really
that's great.
clear.
No, I'm really glad we went through this caveat, and it's amazing that the attention to detail about putting riboflavin in the placebo, so the
Yeah.
pea changes
Yes.
color.
Yeah.
It's no wonder the placebo effect is so high.
Well, exactly. But we also put vanilla sachets in all
Really?
of the bottles, and
Yeah.
we give them this sort of a container, because they do have to take a lot of pills. They're taking up to 12 pills a day, so that's 3 times a day. So we give them these little containers, and we put a vanilla sachet in every single one of them, so that when they put their pills in there, it's masking any smell that might be associated with the minerals. They can be strong smelling, but we also address that through the vanilla sachet. So we've really worked hard on maintaining that blind over the last 2 decades that we've been running these studies. So
amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So, and we've got data to show that people really struggle to guess what condition they're in.
Okay.
Which is also remarkable.
Yeah, which is great. So let's talk about the hypothesis behind the multivitamins first.
Sure.
What multivitamins or you call them multinutrients, right?
Yeah.
So maybe you can distinguish between the two and why you use different terminology. And what's the thinking behind supplementing with these specific nutrients and how they interplay with the brain?
So again, I guess maybe my fourth caveat is that I'm a psychologist and not a manufacturer of supplements. And so I study the idea, and in order to study this idea, you need a supplement.
Sure.
And so I've always fallen back to those Canadian families, not because their supplement is particularly, is necessarily different from something else, but because I have studied other supplements, and I find that those ones have always been better. And I think it's got something to do with that dose that they've been using is relatively rare compared to what you'd buy in a supermarket. Okay. So the dose is much higher. And the breadth is greater. Okay. So it's your essential vitamins and minerals. So there's about 30 essential vitamins and minerals. So that's your B vitamins, that's your vitamin C, your D, your E. That would be your minerals, the full range, not just a few select minerals that people like, because I bet you have your favorites. Like you might have magnesium, you might have zinc, and you have a few favorites. And I suspect you have maybe a few favorites. Some people quite like the B complex. So. Or they might like a bit of vitamin D, but everyone would benefit from some vitamin D.
You're reading my mind.
I've chatted with people not like you, Rupi, before, but I kind of am familiar with that. And we do. But I don't want you to feel blamed or anything for that perspective, because I had the same perspective. I remember seeing Bonnie present her data for the first time, and I'm thinking, which nutrient is making the difference? Which one? And I absolutely honed in on that. Was like, because I have been trained like you to think of a single molecule as being the way to change anything. So if you think about Prozac or you think about Ritalin, that's a single molecule that has such a big effect. So you're looking at this full array of your magnesium and your zinc and your copper and your molybdenum and your iodine, et cetera, the full range. And you're looking at it going, which is it? Which is it? And I'm thinking, I've read about ADHD and zinc. Is it the zinc? Or I've read about vitamin D and depression.
Is it D?
Is it the D that's in there? And so I want to challenge your audience to think that's the wrong way to think about it. Because when you think like that, then you're assuming that you can change a complex psychiatric disorder with one single nutrient. And you evolved to need the full array of nutrients, because as soon as you end up with a deficiency, in one of them, we can get disease. I think one of the reasons why we still fall back on this single nutrient fallacy is that there are a few diseases that are cured with one nutrient. And so we know historically vitamin C for scurvy, for example, you'd have vitamin D and rickets. We have these very specific examples where just changing one nutrient has a huge impact on disease. But there aren't a lot of those examples. So more so, it would be a broad spectrum. So if you think about the making of serotonin, can I write this? Can I do a diagram for you?
Yeah, you can do a diagram. Yeah, go for it. Here you go.
Are you ran out of paper?
I ran out of paper, but yeah, you can use that. You can write on that.
All right. So if you just think about, and this is gonna be terrible, thing, but I can also give you a slide for this. So if you think about, chemical A, and chemical A is going to be your tryptophan, which you get out of your diet, tryptophan.
Yeah, so you can get that from turkey or pumpkin seeds.
You got it.
Yeah, it's an amino acid.
And then that gets converted to serotonin.
Okay, so you've drawn a little box with tryptophan just for the listeners, and that's pointing to another box that shows serotonin. Yeah.
So this is a simple way of thinking about metabolic reactions, and it needs an enzyme which we make, but it also needs cofactors. And when you start to delve into those cofactors, they're always minerals and vitamins. And so that could be, for one particular reaction, it might be just a couple. It might be B6 and zinc. But when you realize that then gets broken down and that gets broken down, and so there's another reaction here and you need your cofactors here and your enzyme, and then the same thing here. And then you then look at the big picture of all the chemical reactions that are happening. It's not long before you kind of go, oh my God, it's so dependent on so many different vitamins and minerals. So if you just supplement with one nutrient, you're just going to clog up the system. If it doesn't have the other nutrients available, then you're going to end up having a limiting factor.
Totally.
So
I totally understand that argument. And, it's just for listeners. So there's one box going to another box, and there's, a couple of cofactors. So zinc or B vitamins, whatever there might be. But your point is, it's not just those two boxes.
Exactly.
There are hundreds of other boxes going on, all requiring different nutrients to optimize the entire picture rather than just one pathway. Because if you just optimize one pathway, it's just one pathway. You haven't looked at the totality of it. Okay.
Exactly. So now that you think about it that way, then you start to realize that this idea that we're going to find that magic nutrient
is a fallacy.
Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense when we think about the biology.
Totally.
And if you then start to think about other things that are going on, like if you think about the Krebs cycle, and I know that's something that apparently you learn in your first year when you go into medicine, but there's something about how they forget it. But I don't know if when they teach that to you, do they tell you that when it goes around the Krebs cycle, and then you eventually make ATP, which is your energy molecule, did they teach you that every single one of those chemical reactions is dependent on vitamins and minerals?
I don't specifically remember the cofactors responsible for them, but to be fair, I wasn't paying that much attention in my first year of medical school, so I wouldn't be able to tell. So honestly.
Then that suggests that most medical people might not have completely noticed.
I don't think we would have. I mean, I think the conversation around vitamins and minerals in the medical sphere, who, for the listeners in context, we don't get any nutrition training, nothing of practical knowledge. It ranges from 0 to 20 hours across a 5 to 6 year degree in the UK. I'm sure it's very similar in Europe and certain parts of America as well, though that is changing. So I would very much doubt that we would recognize vitamins in the way you've just set out with your diagram.
Exactly. So if you think about the Krebs cycle, we know then it's dependent on the availability of vitamins and minerals.
Yeah.
If you look at the methylation cycle, which is the creation of a carbon with 3 hydrogen, your CH3 molecule, the methyl group.
Yeah.
Methyl group is really important for epigenetic effects. So having an impact on turning your genes up or down, expression or not being expressed is dependent on the availability of these methyl groups. Well, that methylation cycle is dependent on having nutrients, and not just one nutrient. There's some B vitamins that are really important, but there are other minerals that are important too. So the idea is that our metabolic system and metabolic activation is dependent on full availability of all nutrients. Now, our ancestors were getting that, but we're not.
Why were our ancestors getting it?
Well, because they were eating real whole foods, and that's where you get them from. So the way to get your minerals is that you will get those out of The minerals are mostly in the soil. And so we have to care about the depletion of minerals in soil. But minerals are coming out of the soil. They get taken up by the plants. And then the plants use those minerals to make vitamins. And you either eat the plant or you eat an animal that ate the plant in order to be able to get access to those nutrients. We don't make them. A few of them we do. Our microbiome make a few B vitamins, but we don't make minerals. And so, and we've evolved, in fact, vitamin C is one we've evolved to no longer make.
No need,
because you can get it out of your food. Well, I mean, that's only if you're eating citrus, right? If you're eating a lot of fruit or, things that contain your vitamin C. But we evolved to not do it because that requires energy to make it. So aren't we clever to depend on our food environment to get access to these essential nutrients that are required for metabolic reaction? But you suddenly change that food environment and you reduce our consumption of your vitamins and minerals. That in itself, it can help us understand the development of disease and the onset and the increasing rate of people who are challenged by these mental health disorders. They don't have access to these nutrients that we depend on for the fight-flight response. So, thinking chemical A to chemical B, well, what do you need for fight-flight response? You need adrenaline, right? Same thing. So the fight-flight response and being stressed is entirely dependent on the availability of nutrients. So and we have a finite resource of these nutrients. So if you're always under stress, that's going to get it first because we evolved to always give it to the fight-flight response first at the expense of everything else. Your sleep, your ability to regulate your mood. Do you end up being irritable when you're stressed? Do you end up being, moody, difficult to manage those emotions? I think a lot of your listeners will kind of that'll appeal to them.
I'm nodding along as well.
So, and that's going back to that resilience. So if your tank is empty and then you're stressed and you've got these things that are, are environmental stressors, not the tiger anymore, but those, the difficulties and the challenges of our daily living, those nutrients get depleted. There is nothing left. And so if you're not constantly repleting that with good food, no wonder we struggle. And what do we reach for when we're stressed? We certainly don't,
go for broccoli.
We don't reach for the broccoli because we evolved to reach for sugar. When you're stressed, you need energy to run away from the tiger. So then we reach for those really carbohydrate-rich types of foods that are going to give us glucose. And so we're just doing it completely wrong.
So just to summarize the argument here around multi-nutrients. So you have your vitamins and minerals that are all used in cofactors. They are used in turn in varying degrees and at various points in your Krebs cycle and other cycles, of which there are many, to create hormones, neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine, other elements as well, other reactions in the body.
Absolutely.
That we can go into a little bit later if you like. And so in a food environment where those are depleted, you can sort of imagine the cascade of effects that happen later on that lead to imbalances in people's mood and affect. And just to heighten or underline a point that you just made there, if you put someone in a nutrient deprived scenario and you stress them with some of the exogenous stresses that we talked about, your alarm clock going off, your emails at work, the stressful journey you have into your I mean, I was just in traffic the whole time, so my cortisol level is probably quite high today. Those are what get prioritized as a result of how we've evolved.
Yes.
And that's where you lose the availability of the cofactors for other things that are just important.
You got it. Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Beautifully summarized.
Okay.
So then we start to understand that we need more nutrients. And that's why I'd still say try and get it out of your food. But there's a lot of reasons why we don't get it out of our food. I mean, the first most obvious one is that we're eating ultra processed products. And so when those foods are made, they get stripped of a lot of the nutrients. And so I came up with this graph that I started showing it to like 10-year-olds because I wanted to really explain
Yeah.
the difference between your spam, which is spiced ham. Do you have it here? They have it in New Zealand.
Yeah,
It's
there is spam here. It comes from a tin.
Yeah, it's in a tin.
Okay.
Or you've got your French fries, or you've got your, which is not necessarily, I'd hate to demonize French fries entirely because they are not always terrible. But you've got your white bread. You've got these foods that we consume, your soft drinks, no nutrients, Coke Zero. There's no vitamins and minerals in those, unless, there are some soft drinks where they're starting to like fortify them or add them in, but they're always adding them in at really low levels when you look at the amount relative to your recommended dietary allowance, which in itself is not my favorite metric, but I'm happy to go into that.
Yeah.
That even then it's really low.
Yeah.
So it might say it's fortified with these nutrients, but the doses are so low that they're not adequate for really supporting us to be optimizing our brain health. They might be enough to prevent you from getting scurvy, but they're not necessarily what your brain needs. I mean, just thinking about the RDA, which you'll see on either that or your it'll say DV, or it'll say RDI. Yeah. It'll say something like that on the back of packages. That's concept was developed post World War II to ensure that our troops would fight and be able to be ready and prepared for combat, not for your brain. So it's about your heart or your muscles, but it wasn't about optimizing your brain. And when you realize that the brain punches above its weight, in that it's 2% body weight, but it consumes 20 to 40% of the nutrients that you eat, you realize that the RDA concept, we should scrap it and start again.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. People start to get fixated on these metrics.
Yeah.
And I've come across this a lot in the research, because we're giving the nutrients above the RDA.
Yeah.
Sometimes, and quite higher than RDA. And so initially, when I first started to do this, like, oh my God, we're going to kill people, we're going to poison them. You can't possibly go above the RDA. And then I realized that the kiwi fruit, which is, one of the New Zealand, fruit that we export and make lots of money off of, the vitamin C goes way above RDA.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, it does. And we're not poisoning the rest of the world. So we must be okay. So if you were
But is that
even
because that's a water-soluble vitamin?
Sorry.
Ones?
Yeah, it's not necessarily the best example, because I knew you'd say that. So if we even look at something like, if you were to consume 5 selenium nuts, 5 Brazil nuts, you'd go over the RDA and selenium. You don't want to go way over, because we appreciate that you can go toxic, but you're not going to kill yourself by having 6 Brazil nuts, but you're going over the RDA and your selenium. Yeah. So that concept is useful for prevention of scurvy, for prevention of rickets. It's a useful concept, but it's not a number that we should be relying on for our brain's needs. Okay. And so we're working in a sort of I think I've got a diagram for this.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, in terms of the RDIs for the multi-nutrients that you're using in clinical research, what kind of numbers are we talking about?
Exactly. No, I'll show you. I think above. I might show you. Who knows if I'll show you or not. Well, there's your brain metabolism one.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow, that's great.
So that was the one that I was drawing before.
Yeah.
But I thought I had
one. We'll get a picture of that. We'll put it on there.
There you go. So here is your how much.
Okay.
So here's your RDA and your UL. So your upper UL limit is your upper limit. But it's, if you consume something at the UL, that is not toxic. So that's what people sort of think. I cannot go. Oftentimes people will say, I can't go over RDA, but I've just explained that even if you had a kiwi fruit, you'd be going over RDA with vitamin C or some, Brazil nuts, or even if you had a cup of lentils, you'd be going way over on some of those nutrients. And again, we don't have people keeling over and dying from having, lentil soup. Yeah. So when we look at real whole foods, you're often going over the RDA. Yeah. But when you eat ultra processed products, you're sitting around here. You're down at about 25% oftentimes. So just for the listener, so we have a diagram. It's a very simple diagram with intake along the y-axis, and you have RDA, which is sort of at the, a couple of units across, and then you've got the upper limit, which is
it's still a safe limit of intake, but it's almost like 2-3 times the RDA, maybe a bit more, and then above that there's the uncertainty factor, and then we don't know whether there's toxicity beyond that.
Exactly. No, you do get, eventually you might get toxic.
Gotcha.
But what's important
but there's a lot, I guess your point is
there's
a big leeway between that.
Exactly. So most of the nutrients that we're giving isn't within that, in this what we think is the therapeutic range. So the under here, that'll stop you from getting a deficiency, like as I said, scurvy or something like that. But that's not optimizing your brain health. We think that's where you're going to get the best hit. Now some of the nutrients go over the UL, and that's because the UL, all the ULs are determined based on taking that single nutrient by itself. So for example, if you were to take zinc by itself, you would eventually could cause a copper deficiency.
Okay.
Because
explain that first.
Well, because they both work together, and that if you end up with just only taking one, then you end up with a deficiency in the other, because of the metabolic reactions. Magnesium, if you go over the UL for magnesium, you increase your likelihood of having diarrhea. But if you take it in combination with those other minerals, we tend to reduce that likelihood of that particular side effect.
Oh, interesting.
It still does happen in the first few weeks. We have about 20% of people will report changes in bowel movements. Okay. That tends to get better as their body gets used to the nutrients. So It's a time-limited problem. So the ULs are useful, but only to a certain extent. And when you start to combine them with other nutrients, you realize that they are of more limited use.
Gotcha.
So we need to care about toxicity. We don't want to kill our patients and our participants in our research. So we are very mindful of making sure that we don't harm them. And we look for that. We're always looking for harm. And we're always looking for negative side effects, because obviously I want to know, and the public want to know if there's harm. And you'll often hear these headlines. The latest one was B6 toxicity, and that reverberated around the world and ended up in my inbox multiple times. And it was interesting because it was about B6 toxicity causing irreversible neuropathy. And I think it was just a few people in Australia. I'm not sure. I mean, neuropathy can happen with B6, particularly if you take it by itself. It tends to be reversible. So I'm confused about why
it was irreversible.
It was irreversible. But neuropathy, as a medical person, you would know that neuropathy can happen with medications as well. Yeah. And one of the things that I want to get into is the interaction between the nutrients and medications. Yeah. Because that's a challenge. And if you add in nutrients at these doses, you can potentiate medications.
When you say potentiate?
Meaning that the side effects increase and it becomes a stronger experience of having that medication.
So the dose of medication may need to be reduced?
You got it. Right. Yes, which is I think a tricky thing for prescribers to recognize, because when people start getting worse, they tend to want to increase the dose of the medication rather than reduce it. So it's kind of counterintuitive. Yeah. But in fact, you were absolutely right. You need to start reducing the dose down as the micronutrients are added in. A better scenario is to do the nutrients with people who aren't medicated. Gotcha. But I appreciate that given so many people are medicated, then you need to learn how to cross-prescribe.
Gotcha. I want to pause there just before we go too deep in the weeds around nutrient interactions and everything. So hopefully the listener and I understand the impact of multinutrients on the functioning of a number of different enzymes in your body, how that impacts hormones, neurotransmitters, etc. The potential use of these in a poor diet environment. So you're actually replenishing nutrients that you're not getting from your food. But then the perplexing question is, within other data or other literature, the use of multivitamins hasn't shown much. There doesn't appear to be an impact on reduction of cancer, reduction of cardiovascular disease. What's your sort of take on those studies?
Yeah, And that's often what you hear about.
Yeah.
I guess my take would be, first of all, my focus is on mental health problems only and challenges only. And so my expertise in those other areas is more limited.
Sure.
I do, but when I have looked at them, they'll often have only taken a select few nutrients. So they'll have given maybe vitamin. I think some of those studies were like vitamin E and A and maybe
like ACE and stuff.
Something, yeah. So they are only looking at the 3. So if we think about metabolic reaction from the perspective of cardiovascular health, I assume you need the broad spectrum again. Why would you just focus in on a few? I mean, I understand the mindset that's led to that kind of research, but I wonder if it's the wrong approach. But I don't know because it's not my area of research.
Yeah.
So I think that happens. Their doses are way low. When you look at the doses, they're down here.
I was going to say the doses that I've seen are nowhere near. They're usually at the RDA level.
Exactly.
They're not at the upper limit level.
So I do wonder if it's got something to do with that.
Dose effect.
But the other interesting thing that happens in the mental health space, and so I'll often talk about this within the context of the number of studies that have been shown to benefit mental health problems. People will study the impact of vitamins or minerals or a combination on mood, but they'll recruit non-clinical samples.
No, what's right?
Non-clinical samples.
Oh,
people who don't have a mood disorder. I know. And it's been fascinating to go, why in the world would you study mood in people who don't have mood challenges?
Issues, yeah.
So then, of course, you're going to end up with no one necessarily getting better. So when I've trawled through this literature, and I can I've tried. It's really hard to do if you realize it. But what I've done here is that I've just collated. It's pretty much up to date. This is looking at studies that have taken a broad spectrum, not even the same level that I've been taking, which is, over your 30 essential, around 30 plus some amino acids and other important nutrients. Some of these are just B complexes. And what I've done is I've said positive or negative RCTs, and negative is where the placebo is as good as the micronutrients, and positive means that micronutrients outperformed the placebo. So I've delved through the literature, but I've also included in here studies that have been done on people who don't have anything wrong with them, so non-clinical samples. But also I've included studies in here where they've only used up to the RDA. So I haven't. I've tried not to cherry pick just what I've done. Yeah. Or people who have really been more true to this concept of going above the RDA. So I've been inclusive. And when we do that, we get about 78% of the studies. And I've been able to count 63, and that these are global with respect to mental health problems. Then you end up with 78% of the studies being positive. If you were to look at this from single nutrients, it would probably be much smaller because, as I explained, the single nutrient approach gives you a pretty modest effect.
So out of the just to summarize for the listeners, out of the studies that are looking at multivitamins, rather than isolate wood, there are some
some that are B complex.
But the majority of the multivitamins across a spectrum of different conditions, aggression, you've got autism there, addiction, stress, ADHD.
Try to be broad.
So broadly speaking, and with all the caveats that you just mentioned in terms of underdosing, and these aren't just your studies using the multinutrients at the doses that you've just described. There does appear to be a positive effect in 78% of them.
Correct. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's not bad. And as far as I know,
it points in the direction of something going on.
It does suggest there might be something going on, and that I don't think there are any studies out there that haven't been published. So if you look back 20 years. We understood that a lot of studies on antidepressants that were negative weren't being published.
Gotcha.
So I think I know the field well enough to know who's doing these studies. And there aren't a lot of us, unfortunately. So I think I know them. And I think that I know that the studies have eventually been published. Understand that in this space, it's really hard to publish studies.
Absolutely. Yeah.
There's a lot of opposition. It's hard to get through the gatekeeper. It is getting better. So, for example, the last study that was done on ADHD, it wasn't mine. It was called the Maddie study. It's not in the book because it came out after the book. But it was a group of American researchers and Canadian. And they got it into the JCAP, which is the Journal of American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, which is the top child psychiatry journal. So we are starting to get some momentum. My first RCT out after huge amount of effort and rejections and appeal to the editor, I got it into the British Journal of Psychiatry. So which isn't bad.
Yeah.
But that was hard work, and it was after I think a year. Nutrimum, which is I know we're going to have time to get to, that was the hardest study to publish in my career, and I don't know why, because it was such exciting data and so inspiring for moms who are pregnant or who want to get pregnant. But that one took us 2 years to publish.
Gosh.
And it just it's you have to wonder, why did it take us so long? And it's not, and we're doing RCTs. It's not like we're doing some kind of other observational studies or whatever. These do tell us a bit more about causality. So I just want you to know that as far as I know, there aren't any negative studies out there that haven't been published that would change
Skew
this ratio and
results,
skew the ratio. So really have tried to do my best.
Clearly, and the passion comes through as well. Of course, I think it's great to understand like your initial perspective on multinutrients as a result of your conventional training, and how you've almost had to convince yourself that there's something going on here.
Yeah.
And just as an aside, like how might one understand, or what kind of symptoms should people be looking for that speak to them being potentially deficient in nutrients? Like, are there certain things that we look out for? So
that is a really good question that comes up a lot, and I think about a lot, and I've thought about from the perspective of our data. So you would think that there's a deficiency, and I think there is a deficiency that's probably going on, but not the kind of deficiency that you might be thinking of, because I think what you might be thinking of, but correct me if I'm wrong, is a deficiency that you go and get a blood test and you go and find out that your vitamin D is low, and then you correct that with additional vitamin D. I think that has some usefulness, but I'm not convinced a lot when it comes to this approach. And I'll try to explain. And it's based on data. It's not, I would have thought the same way as you. We just need to find out who's deficient, find out what they're deficient in, and then we will correct those few things that are wrong, and then they'll be fine. But when you think about the biology again, you realize that that's probably going to create other deficiencies, kind of like the way I talked about zinc and copper. You can end up with deficiencies being created when you just give a few. But it's making the assumption that the people you're being compared to when you do a lab test have got the same issues as you and demands on your life. But if you're somebody who's going through a life stage, you're a teenager, your brain is going under reconstruction. I've just had 2 teenagers. They're now in their early 20s. But they definitely, it's an interesting stage of life, and you have that to look forward to, I understand. And I love the concept of thinking about it as brain undergoing reconstruction, because that's incredibly metabolically active time. And so no wonder, in fact, their nutritional needs are higher than your average individual. Or if you're pregnant, of course, I think that's one that people will recognize and appreciate. Or if you're really stressed, if you're someone who has a lot going on, your nutritional needs are higher. As I explained, you're going to need those nutrients to support the fight-flight response. So there's a lot of factors that can influence our nutritional needs that aren't going to be captured by a blood test. So I might look normal, but I need more. So I might be deficient relative to my own nutrient needs rather than the average. So, and I only come to this conclusion because what we've done is that we've had the opportunity of doing nutrient levels before people start the treatment. And then we measure them again. So we measure them 8 weeks later or 12 weeks later. I appreciate that's not a long-term thing, but that's hard. That's in itself hard to do.
And what kind of nutrients are you looking at?
So we can't measure all your nutrients, right? And so then that as soon as you realize that you would never supplement or think to supplement with, I always give the example of molybdenum. Because do you test for that? So our standard things that we test for would be zinc. You might do copper. You might do vitamin D. You might do B12. What else might you do? Iron.
Yeah, we do ferritin level. Yeah, we might do an HSCRP, but that's more broad spectrum inflammation. Yeah.
So what other nutrients might you do?
Omega-3.
Yeah, and we can talk about omega-3s. We haven't even talked about that.
Yeah,
that's important too.
That's
important too. So you don't actually do the full array. Spectrum. You're not doing the full spectrum. So then so it's like the street light effect, which is that your keys are lost over there, but we're looking for them over here because this is where the light is. So that it does. I'm starting to be less enthusiastic of that approach. But again, it's data driven. So we did the nutrient levels, the ones that would be standard for if you went to see your GP. And most people are actually normal. There's about a third are low in vitamin D, but that's probably pretty standard. So most of them are normal in the nutrients that we tested.
Yeah.
And that didn't, when we select out those who are deficient, if it was based on deficiency as being the driver of benefit, then those people should do better.
Sure.
But they don't.
They don't?
No.
Okay, so that's counterintuitive.
It is counterintuitive. And it's forced me to have to think about it in this different way. Because otherwise I would have thought about it from your standard deficiency model.
Yeah.
But it's made me think, okay, there must be other things that are going on. And that we are looking at this very simplistically. I don't know how we should look at it. And I'd love to kind of figure out, is there a test that we could do to predict who's going to benefit? But at the moment, we've looked everywhere. We have scoured our data. We probably don't have a big enough sample. There are probably, other challenges. But the Maddie study, which is the one done in the States, they found the same thing. So that finding has been replicated, which is that we can't find any nutrients that predict response. And also that it doesn't even mediate response, which just means that when we were looking at blood levels, some blood levels go up. Not all of them. That's important to know as well, is that some blood levels, some things are kept really closely in homeostasis in your blood. So unless you're about to die, I think some of them are just pretty much within a really tight range. Whereas something like B12 will skyrocket. It will skyrocket. But it'll skyrocket in people who are not pregnant. But what we've learned is that women who are pregnant, their B12 does not go up, even though we are giving them an enormous amount of B12.
Really?
Yeah, they do not. They go up a little bit, but nothing like we were seeing in our non-pregnant populations. So that fetus needs a lot. Something's going on. And so we were not seeing the blood levels rising the way we were experiencing in non-pregnant populations. But it wasn't, it didn't predict.
It doesn't predict.
It didn't predict it. So again, I would look at these levels going up and I'd see some people, their B12 wouldn't change at all, even though we're giving them a lot of B12. I think, okay, that's going to tell me that person is not responding. It didn't work. So it leaves us with more questions and answers.
Yeah, so it speaks to the a flaw in the investigations that we currently have at the moment, rather than the fact that the multinutrients aren't changing the biology. And you'd assume that it would be, the nutrients would change what you see, but I think and to your point, I think it's because of homeostasis. So if you think about, I don't know, your blood pH level, potassium, calcium, these are things that are highly, highly regulated because they're so required for, very, very important processes in the body, like muscle contraction in the form of calcium, for example. And even, making sure your acid-base balance is normal. So I think it speaks to the investigation flaws. I
think so. I think we just haven't hit it. So we often talk about personalized medicine.
Sure.
And I I love the idea that you could go and get tested and get everything correct. But I always say to people who take that approach, I say, well, you need to prove that that's better than just giving a broad spectrum. And I need to see the study that randomizes people to the personalized approach, which is let's find out what's wrong with you and deficient and give you those, which is what some people I understand will do.
Yeah.
Versus let's just give you everything that your body needs and it'll get rid of the rest.
Yeah.
And, we need to be mindful of not causing any risk. And I'm happy to talk about that.
Yeah.
And if the personalized medicine ones do better than the broad spectrum, then I will embrace it. And I will be driven by data and I will give up on this approach.
Yeah.
I haven't found anyone who wants to do that study.
Okay. Yeah.
And I don't have enough of sufficient expertise in being able to do that. So we haven't done it. So until that happens, I guess I would be cautious around the need for that. I think there's a need for it, of course, to identify deficiency. But my point being that even people who weren't deficient benefited from the multi-nutrient approach, then that suggests to me that you don't have to have your blood tested to give it a go. Yeah. Yeah. Because you may benefit from more.
Okay. I want to step aside from multi-nutrients just for a moment. I want to get back to them in a second as we talk about specifics with mental health conditions, and we can go deep into some of them if you like, and we'll go into the Nutrimum study as well. You wrote a chapter in the book which I found fascinating called "Not Your Grandmother's Peach," and it speaks to everything from how our environment and our soil has changed, which has led to deficiencies, for want of a better word, in our food.
Exactly.
What's going on there?
I know, exactly. I never thought that this journey would lead me to the soil. I'd never, you go into psychology for a reason, and that's not so that you don't get it. You don't want to be involved in like microbiome, and yet I've ended up collecting a lot of poo samples over the last decade. I never expected I'd be doing that, but I also didn't expect that I would be spending time on farms and trying to understand agriculture and the way we grow our food.
That's amazing. You can't imagine yourself at McGill University doing your neurobiology degree and thinking one day I'm going to be telling people to take multivitamins and going to farms and collecting poop.
Well, exactly. Because if we can fix the farms, and I think we can fix some of these problems, then we wouldn't have to supplement. And again, as I say, I don't want to supplement the world. I want us to fix our food.
Okay.
I almost feel like my next book could be something like Fix Food First, because that's what we need to do. Okay. We need to fix the food. So what I've learned from all of this is that we went from a time, and I even remember learning this as a kid, was that we used to rest our soil. We used to give the soil a time to rest, and you'd rotate crops. But we don't do that anymore, and we do a lot of monoculture crops. And so we end up with just growing soybean, or we just grow wheat, and we just keep doing that over and over and over again. And that the reason we've gone that approach is because we can grow a lot of food, and we've found ways of selecting crops that grow really quickly so that we can feed more people on the planet. So I understand why we do that. And then also people probably make more profit if they can grow it quicker. But the downside of that is that when I told you about how the way to get minerals is that the plants take the minerals up through the soil. But if the plant grows more quickly, then there's less time available to get those minerals up. And in fact, some plants, I've learned, in maybe even just the last couple of months, don't need the full array of minerals to grow. So they won't express the deficiency that's present in the soil, but we will.
Right.
Because we won't have the minerals we need. Because that plant can grow without some of them.
Okay.
Yeah, you'll know it from the animals. So if you have animals on that who are eating from that land, they will express deficiency based on the soil, but the plants won't.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's absolutely fascinating. And so when first of all, we're choosing crops that grow quickly. We're selecting them because of looking pretty that they transport well, that they, that they store well, but we're not choosing them based on their nutrient content. So you start to appreciate that over time we have this degradation in the nutrient quality and quantity of our food supply. On top of that, we then use desiccants or glyphosate, which is can be used as a desiccant in New Zealand, but it could be used for other, for GMO crops and other parts of the world. So you end up using glyphosate, and glyphosate was originally a mineral chelator. So when you think about glyphosate from that perspective, what does it do to the plant? It can put simply, hold on to some minerals so that they don't stay in the plant.
Right.
And then if you think about it from the perspective of it rains and you end up with glyphosate in the soil, and then it will
deplete the soil.
The soil.
Okay.
So we're always coming up with great ideas of things that will make our lives better, but we always have to think about the downside.
Yeah.
So glyphosate is there for a reason. It meant that you didn't have to, you wouldn't have as many weeds or pests or whatever. But the downside of that is that it is having a negative impact on the quality of our food. So we've got to always balance these things, and not like, even the SSRI. Woohoo, great. Wow, it does these amazing things. Oh, well, it didn't quite work as well as we had hoped, and now we have a big problem to solve. So, but this is human nature, isn't it, that we're facing? So I hope that kind of explains some of the things that are going on in our food environment, that even if you ate a healthy diet, you may not be getting the same nutrient value as your grandmother would have.
Are there specific nutrients that are missing in plants that we tend to consume? And also, withstanding that, we have a very limited array of plants that we tend to consume. I think most of the world is consuming, I think, like 8 to 12 different varieties of,
that's right,
it's potato, corn, soy.
I don't know enough about that, because I always say go for the rainbow, kind of like the Drew Ramsey approach is, eat the rainbow and then you'll probably hit all your nutrients. So but what we do know is that it depends on your country that you live in, will influence what the quality of your soil. And I think here is selenium in the UK might be one of the nutrients that's particularly depleted in the soil, but other places it might be iodine. So
I'm not actually sure.
It depends on the on your geography about what nutrients might be specifically or more depleted. But I don't know enough about the plant world to be able to say, this one is going to be deficient. But you can, when I hang around with farmers, they'll say, well, that is there's yellow leaves on that particular plant, so that tells us that it's particularly deficient in copper or something like that. And so, but I don't.
Because it's very hard.
I'm not there
when
yet.
You go to a typical supermarket in the UK, all the food looks identical. The leaves look green, the tomatoes look shiny, but then when you taste the food,
they don't taste as good.
I
know.
I get a Rutherford box now, and I'm very proud of this Rutherford box. They don't sponsor us or anything, but like whenever I get my box every week, I really look forward to it, because the Swiss chard tastes like nothing else you've tried. When you try the tomato, it tastes sweet. It tastes like a tomato should. It doesn't taste floury. The firmness of the cell structure is like incredible. And
so you should talk to that grower.
And
find out what are they doing.
Well, I mean, they're organic. They only source locally or from European countries if they have to. Generally, everything's in season. And
those are all things. I bet they probably remineralize or use a really good compost for
they
their
regenerate,
soil.
They're
regenerative. All of those things are going to make a huge difference on the nutrient quality of your food. So you might be someone who doesn't need supplements, because if that's how you're eating, then you might be fine and you might be okay.
Well, we're going to get to that later on, because I'm attracted to the idea of a multi-nutrient now. But we'll come to the conclusion a little bit later. The other thing I read about in that chapter that was really surprising to me was how climate change is increasing the
Yes.
carb level
Exactly.
in our
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I was surprised by that too. And again, it helps the plants grow faster, and then you again have the problem of the minerals being shown to be depleting. So
Wow.
so they've done experiments where they will they'll expose them to more carbon dioxide, and that the further you are, I don't know exactly how they do this, but they'll control it so that the plant is exposed to different amounts, and that as you change those amounts, that can change the amount of nutrients that are
Wow.
contained within that food. So I know it's kind of scary when you
Wow.
add it
So
all
there's
together.
more sugar in my food.
Yeah, exactly. So you add all of that together and you go, oh my goodness, we really need to address the food supply in so many different ways.
Yeah. Do you going back to micronutrients now and the need to supplement, do you think some individuals have an inherited need for additional
I think they do.
nutrients?
Yeah. So if you go back, here we go, to this one.
Yeah.
And you realize
so we're back
that
looking at chemical A to
A
chemical
to- A
B
to
with
B.
the enzyme in the middle.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So
and the
now we're going to focus
cofactors.
in on this enzyme.
Mhm.
So if that enzyme is coded by your DNA.
Mhm.
So if there is an error in the coding for that enzyme, then that reaction is going to be slow and sluggish because it's not quite right. It's not fitting quite right to help A go to B. It will happen, but it's just that coding error is going to lead to a bit of a problem in A to B. But the good news is, and most people appreciate this from their high school chemistry, if they did high school chemistry, is that what can you do to speed up a chemical reaction? You add more cofactors.
Yeah.
And so by adding more cofactors, which are your vitamins and minerals, then you can speed that up, and you can kind of almost correct what we'd call an inborn error of metabolism. So yeah, we think they exist, but they're hard to track down. MTHFR, I can't even remember how I know it stands for a long, complicated
methyl
name.
tetrahydrofolate.
Well, exactly. Thank you.
reductase.
I'm glad you didn't
something like
ask
that.
me to spell it out. But that's coding for an enzyme, and that is one that a lot of people hone in on when it comes to mental health problems. That they say that there's something wrong with that particular MTHFR enzyme.
Yeah.
So that is one example of a possible inborn error of metabolism where you need more cofactors. But I also think that's ended up simplifying it, and that when we think about mental health disorders, and we used to look for that one gene and we never found it.
Yeah.
And then we realized that it's probably an effect of lots of small little effects across the whole genome, and that they add together and then they increase your risk. So the same thing might be, you might have several inborn errors of metabolism, and that compounded together, they might influence your nutritional needs, and that your nutritional needs are higher.
Yeah. I mean, the way I think about this is, I think within medicine, as you've been articulating, we have been looking for that needle in a haystack, where actually it's the odd looking pieces of hay within the haystack that we should be looking for, collecting together.
Yeah.
Because it's those minor perturbations in like how enzymes are being used or not used as effectively because of the lack of cofactors across a number of different pathways that are leading to the phenotypic effect, i.e. the physical manifestation of symptoms, which in what we're talking about today could be a mental health illness.
And I hope that when this is talked about in even 10 years time, but maybe longer because science is so slow, that what I'm talking about is simplistic, and that they'll have honed in and figured out maybe more personalized, hopefully, or potentially.
Yeah.
But at the moment, this shotgun approach of giving the full array of the nutrients, and everybody might need a different combination of those nutrients to optimize their brain health, and that they'll eliminate the rest. And that's where we have to talk about the risk. And oftentimes I will be challenged and said, well, how do we know you're not going to build them up and it's going to become toxic? Is that already a question that you're going to ask me? I don't know. And so, and all I can say to that one, Rupi, is that, well, first of all, a lot of that toxicity probably is related to giving it just by itself. And I think we can reduce toxicity when we give the full array together, because that's how they've evolved to work together. So I think we can address toxicity a little bit in that way. But ultimately, I'm not here to take your worried well person that, if you jump out of bed and you're energized and you have, your mood is stable and you sleep well and, life is okay and you go with the punches. You don't need supplements. That kind of person doesn't need supplements. I'm not working with those kinds of people for the most part. I'm working with people who are struggling with mental health challenges. And when you look at that and you say, okay, here's what we find when we supplement. We find that about half of them benefit when you do a short-term trial, which is, 8 weeks. We end up usually with a 50% much to very much improved. So a clinical observable benefit. When we then move them into an open label trial, we end up getting that to around 60 to 70% because people always dampen down their responses during a placebo trial, is our experience. Then we can make about, between 60 to 70%. In one study, we've just done 80% do really well. You need to take that and say, but there might be a risk. And I mentioned the bowel issues as being a side effect we have observed, and that that can be higher than the placebo. Most side effects tend to be equivalent as the placebo. Long term, we've done our best to track down people who are taking the supplements for like an extended period of time, and we send them to bloods and we look at their liver function and their kidney function, and nothing comes out that goes, oh my God, there's something bad happening here. But I can never assure someone that there's no risk. And so if you're someone who is terrified of the unknown risk associated with these vitamins and minerals, that something might happen down the road, I can't reassure you that it's not going to happen. But what I can say is that we know that the risks of SSRIs and the other treatments are higher than the risks associated with the vitamins and minerals, because we see side effects in those treatments within 8 weeks. You see sexual side effects. We've been measuring that. It doesn't happen. We haven't seen any evidence that that's going to happen. In fact, in the teen study, one thing I'll say, even though it's not published, is that suicide ideation went down with the micronutrients in the teens. And these are teens who are struggling with their mood. And we know that within that same period, you would see that go up with an SSRI. So everything that we've looked for overall tends to actually be to the benefit. We've done blood pressure. We haven't observed anything. So we've done our best with not a lot of money to try to track down if there's any risk. So I take it incredibly seriously. And again, with the pregnancy study, you can imagine we did not want a thalidomide story here. So we looked so closely at birth effects, those infants. We've been following those kids. They're now 5 years old. So we are looking absolutely for risk, because it's the one thing that I hear about all the time. You're going to kill people with vitamins and minerals. I'm like, what? Where does that come from? Okay, we'll make sure we measure that. So I've taken that to heart, and I certainly don't want to cause harm. And at this stage, I can say we don't think there's an indicator, but I can't promise it's not going to happen. I can't promise it's not going to increase your risk for cancers down the road. I can't say that that's not going to happen. But when you see people who are so physically, not just mentally healthy, but physically healthy, they tend to report to us their skin gets better. They seem to not get sick as often. You hear all of that story, it's hard to imagine that they're going to just suddenly drop dead of a heart attack. But I don't want to say that that's not going to happen. So I hope I've addressed the
no, absolutely. I think
as best as I can.
You laid it out in your book as well. There are certain contraindications for folks who have genetically high levels of copper and
that's right.
iron, for those with Wilson's disease and hemochromatosis. Those who I believe have active prostate cancer as well, or active cancers.
There is active cancers as a possibility. Again, I'm not sure, because those studies weren't done by us. And I don't know what dose they were using, whether they were using specific combinations of nutrients. But yes, we always were very open that that's been an observation.
And just to highlight your point, the side effects and the efficacy of some of these psychiatric meds that we are using long term, huge.
Exactly. Exactly. And they've been observed.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So it's like the unknown versus the known.
exactly.
And the known is actually not great when it comes to some of these
Exactly.
medications. Not to say that we're anti-medication here or anything, but like, it's just something that people should be aware of.
Well, exactly. And that's what I say. You then need to you have to weigh the risks and benefits for yourself. And you need to make that informed choice. All I'm here to do is provide that informed choice that there are other options out there that may be more suited for you. Totally. It might be that the medications haven't caused any side effects. So go for it. And if you're healthy and you're doing well and you're on a medication, then stay on your medication. That's fine. You're lucky. That's great. I'm delighted. I'm enthusiastic when I see that happen. And I wouldn't be here telling people to stop in that situation. But I'm more likely to hear about people who are struggling. They're still depressed. They're not doing well, and they're on a medication. Totally. And it's those people where you might think about having a different kind of conversation.
Are there any treatment arms or examples of where they've had micronutrients and medications?
We've never done that. There's a psychiatrist, Louis Melmadrona, who has done some clinical trials with bipolar disorder and people who are medicated. And then one of Bonnie's original studies, they were medicated and they had bipolar disorder. Those were open label trials, meaning they weren't randomized controlled trials. Lewis's studies were controlled, but he had a lot of challenges with running that. So it won't end up being a great study to be able to cite just because of all the challenges they incurred, and it was during COVID and all kinds of other hurdles. So the original studies that Bonnie did, and then there was Charlie Popper, who's a psychiatrist at Harvard. He's now retired. He also published some open label studies early on. And what they showed was that people got well and better, and their symptoms were better with reduced medications.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Wow.
So that has been published, and we've done analyses of people who have happened to take the nutrients and also been on medications. And then if they reduce their medications, they have a better outcome than people who don't reduce their medications. So we have a lot of information there, but you can't do a controlled study easily with a blind with medication. So all of my studies are done with people who are medication free. It doesn't mean they haven't taken them before, but it just means that when they're in our clinical trials, they need to be med-free. But the good news that we have found from our studies is that those people who have a history of taking medications, which we'd call them, and I hate this term, but treatment resistant, because they've tried a treatment and then they haven't responded. Those people do really well with the micronutrients. So that's a really good finding. And we showed that with Nutrimum, that the women who had a history of having taken medications, they responded to the micronutrients and they were less likely to respond to the placebo. So that was a good news story.
So
there.
There's definitely hope there. Like even for people who don't want to come off or are struggling to come off medications, that potentially micronutrients could be useful.
Exactly. But it does mean the physician needs to be on board. They cannot sabotage it, which happens. Yes, I'm familiar with that one a lot. So they need to be open-minded to the possibility that this could be effective for their patient and be willing to cross-taper. So they need to know enough about the micronutrients to manage that. And the companies do help with that cross-tapering because they recognize that this isn't training you got in medical school. So they do provide that support for physicians to do that cross-tapering, but you do need to be open to it so that you don't sabotage it and make it worse for that patient.
Totally. There was an anecdote in your book that I remember reading about the psychiatrist who had witnessed
Megan Rodway.
An improvement in that. Was it ADHD or emotional dysregulation?
That kid had,
it was very severe.
Hallucinations and delusions.
That's it. Yes,
really severe case. So he had been, they called him Andrew, and he was hospitalized at I guess it would be one of the hospitals in Calgary, and He
How old
was
was he?
12 or something
12,
at the time.
okay.
Maybe he was younger than that. Came in with really severe hallucinations, delusions. They tried everything with this kid. They did every test imaginable. And after 6 months, they sent him home to with his mother and to his parents and said, "You're going to have to look after him. We have nothing else to offer." They read about the micronutrients and they said, "We want to give this a go." And at the time, I know Megan well now, but at the time, she said, "Well, it sounds like snake oil, but I have nothing else to offer." And that's the kind of attitude I'd love physicians to take on. I am happy for people to be skeptical, and so you should be with the unknown. But at the same time, with our level of data, you should also be curious, and you should kind of go, "Wow, she got it into like some pretty decent journals, medical journals. Maybe there's something here. Maybe I should read more into it, and maybe I should understand and embrace the biology." So then they followed Andrew for another 6 months, and his hallucinations and delusions completely disappeared. And I know that he's now in his mid-20s, and he's, as long as he continues to take the vitamins and minerals, he stays well.
Wow.
When he stops, he regresses. And
Wow.
and the interesting thing about that case was that they did a cost analysis. And the sad thing about the nutrients at the moment is that you got to pay for them. And I face this battle all the time. And I figure, I got to do. I'm the one who's producing the data. Someone else can solve this problem. That someone, insurance companies should cover it. But when they looked at the cost, it was less than 2% of the cost of his inpatient psychiatric stay.
Yeah.
And so the cost to society could be huge if we decided to embrace this and use it in situations like Andrew. I'd love to say in pregnancy, I think we'd save so much money to the healthcare system with the benefits that we observed with, reduction in preterm birth, good healthy birth weight, reduction in infant resuscitation, reduction in postpartum hemorrhaging. All the benefits that we observed at birth based on the women who were exposed to the micronutrients during pregnancy makes you think we could save a lot of money. If you reduce preterm birth.
Oh, 100%.
I was stunned by what I've just described to your listeners, all of those things, those indicators. We were looking at them to make sure we didn't increase them, or we didn't cause anything. And in fact, everything was amazing. And we collected a group of moms who weren't taking the nutrients to be able to have a comparison group. It wasn't perfect because they weren't randomized, but they were women who had a typical pregnancy, not depressed, not taking the micronutrients. And they did, in some indicators, those babies were better than the babies born to those moms who weren't depressed. And when we know that depression is a risk factor for increased preterm birth, that your baby is more likely to be unsettled and emotionally dysregulated, we made those babies were calm babies. Their motor control was better. We then also compared them to infants who received standard care, exposed to antidepressants during pregnancy. And the sad thing for me about that was just how many challenges those infants had, and that the infants exposed to the micronutrients were so much better. Like, you don't even need a statistic to interpret them.
Yeah.
I can show you
let's have a look at that.
The graphs.
Sure. Yeah.
So these are what I've done here is that I've just
can we talk a bit about the study actually?
Sure. Sorry, I launched into Nutrinom.
No, that's great. I mean, it's been on my list to talk about it, so we can talk about it now. But so Nutrinom was looking at depressed mothers.
Yes.
Who were on a psychiatric medication?
No, they weren't. They were not.
Okay.
So they were medication free. They'd had a past history. Some of them had a past history of being on meds before.
Gotcha.
So when I said that they were good responders. They were not taking it at the time, but they were people who had in the past. So we're looking at that point. We're looking at moderators of response, like. Are there subgroups of moms who do particularly well with the micronutrients? Because you always want to know that. If you've got a finite resource of, we can only afford to give micronutrients to 10% of psychiatric patients, who are we going to give them to? Yeah. We're trying to answer that question. We're trying to say, who's going to really benefit from this? And the ones who had had a past history of meds
And how
did do well.
many women in each group did you
so
have?
So there were 88 women. It was a small sample. It was not easy to recruit.
Sure.
There was a lot of fear from referral people saying you're giving them nutrients in really high doses, and oh my God. And I'm not negative about that. I think that's perfectly fine, and we should be thinking that way. But at the same time, how do you advance science if you don't do these studies, right? So we had looked at every one of those nutrients and whether or not it was safe in pregnancy. And the ethics committee was completely on board. It was also reviewed by the equivalent of FDA. It's called MedSafe in New Zealand. And they cleared the study. So we were good to go, but we still
Which is incredibly hard to do.
Exactly. Exactly.
Let alone pregnant women. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, I was surprised that we were able to do the study.
Yeah.
I thought we would be told no. And it was placebo controlled, but in all fairness, there was no data. So that's what you do. You have to make the assumption that it's not going to have any effect. And as long as you can prove that there's going to be no harm, we have an acknowledgement that women don't want to take SSRIs during pregnancy. So there's in a way like a market for it, if that's probably the wrong term, but there are people who are looking for other solutions. And so we randomized 88 to either the micronutrients or placebo. And we recruited between 12 to 24 weeks of gestation. And so you might have started at 12 weeks, or you might have gone all the way to be at 24 weeks and then start in the study. The study with the RCT was 12 weeks long. And so they could be finished by the time they got to the third trimester, again, depending on when they enrolled. And our primary focus of that study was to see whether or not we could reduce depression. And the good news story here, Rupi, is that 3/4 of the women went into remission in their depression, regardless of which arm they were in.
Oh, wow.
I know. That's even higher than what I told you earlier, I think, actually. That's like the highest. That was the highest placebo effect that we came across.
Wow.
So that's looking at the EPDS. I mean, it's not the best measure, but everyone uses it. It's the Edinburgh Depression Rating Scale.
Okay.
And that's looking at, you take the scores and you say, have they dropped enough and have they dropped down into the non-clinical range? So that's where I get that number from. And, but when we looked at, and I always say that's a good news story because it's like light touch therapy. All you're doing is meeting with them once a month and then giving them questionnaires. That's it. And it was done by a PhD student, lovely, lovely, lovely English PhD student, must have had an impact, but that's great news. I am always thrilled to tell people this story because it means that you don't necessarily have to take the micronutrients. But that's why I was also telling you that there are subgroups. And the women who had more what we called personality difficulties, they're the ones who are probably more dysregulated. They did particularly well with the micronutrients. Right. And that's a good news story because they tend to be harder to treat.
Yeah.
So we're finding a treatment that works really well for your more severe range. What a great news story. And the ones who have more milder, expressions, just give them a placebo or whatever.
Give them a placebo. Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah.
So,
or they could just take the multinutrient because it doesn't appear to have any side effects.
Correct. Absolutely. Yeah. But I'm not here to sell the product, sure. And I'm here just to tell a story.
So just looking at some of the data that you got here. So
I was just describing the study, and it started as an RCT, but then as we were doing the recruitment, I realized there was so much fear around the harm that we then decided to recruit a group of mums alongside who were not depressed, not taking them, and then also recruit a group of standard care who technically shouldn't be depressed, right?
Yeah.
They shouldn't be depressed, but they were taking antidepressants. Many of them were still depressed. Taking antidepressants, standard care. So, and so we could then compare those three groups. And the first thing I've had a lot of pushback on this particular study because we didn't show a great outcome for antidepressants. So I will tell you that now. And I'll also say that the sample was small. So we can, those are limitations associated with that. There was nothing special about them. We compared them on demographics. There was nothing different about those three groups. In fact, the differences lay in that the micronutrient groups, women should have had a poorer outcome. They were more likely to be past smokers, and there was something else about them. There are a few other indicators that increase their risk.
Gotcha.
So they were starting on the back foot. And what I show you here is I'm just showing you this is gestational age. So the moms who were born to the micronutrients. Now, just understand that at this point, we are outside of the RCT. So that makes it complicated. And we are now observational. And we have chosen the moms who had at least 2 months of exposure to the micronutrients. And they were, depending on when you enrolled in the study, like if you enrolled at the study at 12 weeks, you were randomized to micronutrients, you'd have 6 months exposure. If you started the study at 24 weeks, randomized to placebo, birthed early, you might get none.
Gotcha.
Okay, so we now select.
Yeah.
It's an arbitrary reference. We said, okay, let's take the kids who have had at least 2 months of exposure to the micronutrients. Let's look at their birth outcomes because of this variability in days of exposure. But what we do know is the longer you were exposed to the micronutrients, the better the outcome. Okay, so I just want to explain those samples.
Yeah.
And so these are the moms who were at the gestational age 39.5 on average for the micronutrients, very similar to the non-depressed, non-exposed to the treatment kids. And this is the antidepressant group. So they're born about, I've said it here, 1 week earlier. They were, the micronutrient babies, sorry, I'll do it in the opposite way. The micronutrient exposed babies were born 1 week later than the antidepressant exposed babies. They were taller by 2 centimeters or longer. And they were on average 300 grams heavier. Okay, so that's what you're seeing here. So you do not need a statistic to see that group difference. Those are large effects. So I've indicated those effect sizes there.
So to summarize it, those exposed had longer gestation, which is a good thing, just for the listener. They were taller, i.e. bigger, and they were heavier. Again, all good markers of babies.
I know. And that was surprising.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I always say these are the more exciting findings than are like the fact that we showed that we could help depression.
Yeah.
And what I didn't say was that when we did compare the micronutrients to placebo in the RCT phase, globally, those mums were doing better on the micronutrients. So they were identified as being more likely to be treatment responders.
Gotcha.
Their sleep was better. So there were some indicators that they did do better. But these are the findings that I find more exciting because they have implications more broadly for reduction of preterm birth. So when we look at these data in a different way and we start to look at them more as a binomial, would that be right? Yes or no, were they preterm or not? Then I'll just take a second here. So what we see here is that I'm now looking at it, yes or no, were they preterm or not? And so what you can see here is that in the micronutrient group, we had a preterm rate of 5.5%, which is lower than your national average in New Zealand. I don't know what it would be in the UK. And remember, these are women who started their pregnancy depressed. So they're at a higher, depression in itself is a risk factor for preterm birth.
Okay.
So that is a great outcome. This is the sad thing, 20% preterm on antidepressants. Now you'd kind of go, wow, that's high. That's what we found when we started to explore in the literature. I'm definitely not here to tell women or physicians what to do around this. But I think one of the things that I learned in this journey that absolutely surprised me was that there's no controlled studies of SSRIs during pregnancy.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's never been a randomized control trial. And this is what stunned me because I know that they're used so much. I mean, I think it's about 7% of pregnancies, at least in New Zealand. I think it's something like between 3 to 7% of pregnancies will have exposure to the antidepressants. And the fact that there's never been a controlled trial to say, hey, does this work to treat depression, and what are the outcomes? And so we've relied on observational studies. And when you rely on observational studies, everybody debates it, and then they control for a bunch of confounders. And then in the end of it, they say, oh, there's no risk. The way that I frame this now is that it might be that antidepressants don't cause preterm birth. But we know that if you're depressed, you have a greater likelihood of having a preterm birth. So they don't mitigate that negative effect of depression, nor should we expect it to, right? Why should we expect an SSRI to have an effect on preterm birth? You kind of should at least have that question in your mind of, why doesn't it? Because if the depression is improved, then
it should have a knock-on effect on,
you'd think so. But I'm careful about that. And so I just say, well, it hasn't mitigated that. So nor should we expect it. But vitamins and minerals do. They do. And they also do it for this one here, for example. We're looking at infant resuscitation. Infant resuscitation on SSRIs is high. In our study, it was 45% of them. That's down at, I think it's 15% in our micronutrient exposed kids.
Wow.
And then when you look at postpartum hemorrhaging in the vaginal births, you end up with about 30% in both of the comparison group, that non-exposed, non-depressed group, but also in the SSRI exposed infants. And I can't even see the graph at the moment on the number, but it's around, it's under 10% of postpartum hemorrhaging. What was going on there? I mean, we wonder if it's vitamin K. We've had, I don't know. We weren't looking for that. It just happened. So I really hope we have replication of this, because it is one study, but it's a controlled study. So it's more data than we have on SSRIs. We also looked at postpartum depression, and our postpartum depression rates were down at the standard 10% range. If you're depressed during pregnancy, that tends to increase your likelihood of having postpartum depression by about fivefold. So we brought that right down to a standard typical pregnancy, as if you would be non-depressed. So all of that, again, one study, happy for it to be pulled apart, but there's never been a study that has looked at whether SSRIs taken during pregnancy reduce postpartum depression. Don't you think that's a question that someone should have asked by now? And again, I was surprised, and I see that you're surprised that's never been looked at.
I'm very
Believe
surprised.
me, I have scoured the literature for it. I have asked everyone, every audience, do you know of anyone? And they'll often say, oh yeah, there's studies. And then they'll refer to a study that gave SSRIs when the baby was born. And they'll look at that. I'm like, no, don't you want to prevent it? So I mean, I've learned a lot, and it's been a sad, like it's been really sad for me to learn all of this, because I get, I've been pregnant. I know, that you are relying on your physicians to provide you with good advice.
Totally.
And I just was surprised that these data don't exist, and happy for a listener out there to show me the RCT I haven't seen. And I'm happy to be proven wrong.
I mean, for obstetricians out there, or midwives, I know this is just one study, and you've perfectly caveated everything, and you've talked through the limitations. But given the lack of knowledge out there, what do you think? What would your message be? That we should be taking this seriously, or we should be taking action?
Well, I think there's enough data there that you could take action, because if these data are anything by which, around the preterm birth, for example, we would save governments a lot of money very quickly. So I think you could take action but of course continue to collect data. But I'd also be totally open to other people replicating this, or replicating in a really different way, because we came from it from the perspective of targeting women who were depressed. But when you see those other incidental outcomes on birth outcomes, then you can see there's probably a bigger benefit maybe for other women who might be at risk for some of these outcomes. And I don't know who they are or medically who they might be, but I imagine there might be others out there. The infants were more regulated. Like we did early indicators of motor control and emotion regulation, and everything we looked at, those kids were starting life better, like a better start to life. I mean, we should all want that for the next generation, given all of the challenges we have. And given we've recognized our kids are less resilient, I think this would put them at an advantage around being more resilient.
Yeah.
So I guess I really do want to figure out how to get these data out there and for people to pay attention to it.
Yeah.
But
absolutely.
it's tough. It's so tough.
I can imagine it's tough, yeah, because you've got the weight of pharma against you and these entrenched beliefs that I have around multivitamins.
Exactly. That's right. And also this belief that the data exist on the current treatments that don't. And that was the biggest surprise for me.
Yeah.
Absolutely biggest surprise. Because I went in it naively. We only collected the data on standard care, not to show that the antidepressants had any negative effect, but just to show that the micronutrients were as good as standard care. And when we looked at this, I mean, honestly, like these data have been grilled over, like whatever the word would be, but looked in every single direction, because I did not want to publish a study with these data to not have 100% confidence behind what we had collected. This all comes from birth records. So we have,
there's no way to falsify that. I want to come back to ADHD and autism just very, very quickly. I want to touch on this before we wrap up, because I could talk to you for another couple of hours.
I'm delighted
absolutely.
You could.
There's been a bunch of examples that you put in your book around how multivitamins might help other people, those suffering with premenstrual syndrome. There was mention of ADHD that we've touched on, autism spectrum disorder as well that we're talking about off air. Similar thing. What's going on there? And we haven't touched on mitochondria either, which is quite interesting in terms of how the multivitamins might be improving. Or I guess it speaks
we
to
did
the
talk
sort of,
to ATP and we talked about that. So it does sound a bit too crazy and miracle-like to say that it treats so many different disorders.
Sure, yeah.
And that's when now it's really challenged me on the diagnoses and how we do that. And I have really moved away from diagnoses as a consequence of this research. So I, again, went into clinical psychology with my DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, and you have it there, and you're like looking at trying to figure out which category do you fall into. And there's like, and that number keeps going up every time there's a new edition, and we're at like 500 different disorders. And it's not based on etiology at all. It's just their categories, and there's nothing about them around cause. And so I have to say, I really do hope that in 100 years, they got rid of the DSM because I don't know if it's really helping us, and it's making us think that there's these categories of disease that I don't think exist. So, and that's probably maybe a bit of a controversial
No, it's music
thought
to my ears. It's so funny we're talking about this, because we were literally having this conversation yesterday in the studio about how labels set you down a path of treatment based on guidelines, and it doesn't get to the root cause, which in some cases might be a nutrient deficiency or a lifestyle deficiency, whatever it might be.
And if we continue, and at the moment, so many people are seeking a cause for their distress. And when they get a label, they feel relief that they found out what it was. And all it is a label. And it doesn't tell you why you have it, and it doesn't get at the solution. So I really have I'm almost at the point of walking away from my profession, because I'm going, this is what we do. And this is, we're into the labeling and the diagnoses. And when we know what it is, then this is what we're going to do. And I'm I'm just less and less enthusiastic for it. I know it has a place. I think people like labels, and maybe it gives them some reassurance or something, but it doesn't tell you where to go other than it. If you get a label in a conventional manner, you're going to be offered a medication, and maybe psychotherapy if you're lucky.
Even on the other side, like being a medic, you were rewarded when you got the diagnosis.
Yes,
what's the
you get it right.
diagnosis? What's the spot diagnosis?
That's
and when you're like, oh yeah, that's psoriasis or whatever it is, and you're like, yeah, well done, pat on the back, and that's how you sort of
exactly
got this the confidence that you were being a good physician.
And that's exactly how it happens as a clinical psychologist, that yes, you figured out that it was depression with non-psychotic features or whatever. I mean, I don't remember all the categories anymore because I kind of moved away. But going back to the research is that what we see benefit the most and the quickest is emotional dysregulation.
Okay.
So if you have a child with ADHD, who's like, I like the kids with ADHD who are really dysregulated, and a lot of them are like, they're just their mood changes really quickly, and they go from 0 to 100 instantaneously. Those kinds of kids, when they come to our study, I go, I think I'm going to have something for you. Whereas some of the ones who may have more subtle symptoms or maybe just inattentive, I think they'll benefit from the micronutrients, but not as quickly and not as obviously. When if your child is aggressive and really difficult to parent, and every day is everything you ask of them is difficult, and suddenly you put them on the micronutrients and they pick up their stuff and they do what you told them to do, and they stop swearing. And we even have this little clip of a kid who just says, I stopped doing the F word. And I do what my teacher tells me to do. And you're like, what is this miracle treatment? But I think that it helps them just regulate themselves. And don't we all want to be regulated? Yeah. So in depression, it helps them with that. With anxiety, we see that with stress. ADHD's got that. ASD has got that level of dysregulation, irritability. Then I think, are we doing a metabolic tune-up? Is that all we're offering? And that your body then has the nutrients it needs to function optimally. I think there's opportunity for this to become more refined over time. But where I hope we've changed the dial here is that we have explored this broad spectrum approach, which hadn't really been done before. We've looked at it in different ways with different challenges, and we keep showing the benefit. I mean, the only reason I know so much about stress, for example, is it happened that we were doing studies in the middle of a friggin' earthquake, right? And so there you're like, oh, okay, let me just divert and explore the impact of nutrients on stress. And what we learned was that people who happened to take micronutrients before the earthquake recovered more quickly.
Wow.
I know. So that's pretty cool. Yeah. So the takeaway from that is, if you're going to be in an earthquake, then make sure you take micronutrients. And when you laugh at that, you realize if you're going to be stressed, then make sure that your body is well replenished.
Yeah, gotcha. That's brilliant. I want to bring this to a close. I think we should talk a bit about any particular, because we're talking quite broadly about broad spectrum multi-nutrients. What kind of brands are we talking about? What kind of doses generally? Like, are there any specific ones? Because if there's someone listening to this and saying, you know what, it sounds safe. I know. There is data. I would want to give this a try with my physician, or maybe they feel like they want to tune up as well. Yeah. Like what should they be looking for?
What should they look for? And so again, here not to sell products. Totally. I don't make any money out of it. We do put it all in the book in chapter 11. So in the Better Brain, I go through all the supplements that have ever been studied for the treatment of mental health challenges. So just kind of going back to those data that I was showing you. Yeah. And while there are probably thousands of products out there, I've honed in on maybe about 15 that have ever been researched for benefit of mental health problems. And the ones that I keep going back to are those Alberta formulas. So
formula.
So that's Daily Essential Nutrients and Empower Plus. So those are the ones we've studied, but I always want to say that there's nothing special about them. nutrients can't be patented. The companies would be delighted if others would, formulate in a similar way at those doses. There are a lot of regulations that get in the way of them, depending on what country you live in, but you can buy them in the United Kingdom.
Gotcha. So
they
daily
are available.
Essential nutrients and Empower Plus.
Are the two ones. Yeah. And so they're two different companies because they ended up splitting into the two families ended up splitting in two companies. And so the original one called themselves True Hope because they said, I know it's a terrible name. I can't tell them, but I mean, from a scientist's perspective anyway, but patients like them.
Sure.
So they called themselves True Hope, and the other company is Hardy Nutritionals.
Hardy, okay.
Hardy Nutritionals.
Hardy's Nutritionals.
Hardy, Hardy.
Okay. We'll link to those in the show notes. Again, we don't have any financial affiliations. We tend not to do anything with supplement companies, but and you were mentioning how like some of the people in the trials need to take 12 tablets a day.
Absolutely. That's what we've been doing with the teenagers, and with pregnancy we did up to 12 pills a day, 3 times a day. When you think about your calcium pill, a calcium pill is bulky, right?
Yeah.
That's one mineral.
Right.
There are 15 minerals in there. Then you start to understand why it has to be that many.
Wow.
And I mean,
is that the recommended dose that these supplements are marketed at, or is that above and beyond the recommended dose?
That's a tricky question, Rupi, because it depends on what country you live in. So if in the United States, which is where it's manufactured, because they can't manufacture in Canada because of the regulations on supplements there, but in the US it's the Wild West and you can do whatever you want there, and so they can say 12 a day on the bottle. But if you go import it into New Zealand, there's some challenges in New Zealand at the moment around regulation supplements. I won't go into, but on their bottles it said 4 a day. I don't know what it says on the bottles in the UK if you were to buy it in the UK. So that's one of the downsides, is that depending on how supplements are regulated, they might only be allowed to say 4 a day. But we have been using 12 a day. So all of this is explained in the book in great detail around the doses, but also acknowledging these challenges around regulation of supplements, which in itself is a podcast.
And you mentioned prevention earlier, which is something I want to dive into, because all this seems like we're reacting.
Yes.
And we're giving folks these kind of doses.
So with prevention, the only thing I can lean on there are the stress studies. So those are the studies that we did in the earthquakes, and then there was another study we did after a flood in Alberta, Canada, and then a third. It wasn't exactly a study, but I talk about it in the book as following a massacre. It was an awful event that happened in Christchurch. So based on all of that, we were using around 4 pills a day to help with stress. And in those situations, 4 a day seemed to be like a really good maintenance dose. So you don't need to go up to that 12. 12 is when we've got someone we want to help them quickly than the 12 a day. And then over time, I would say you stick to that dose for around 6 months, and you could probably reduce that over time. So you don't have to stay at the 12 a day for an extended period of time. And most people tend to drop down to like 4 to 8. Anything less than 4, I don't think would. I mean, we don't know enough about it. I don't think it would be it would be good enough.
So even at that dose, that's higher than what the RCTs that I'm looking at for, cardiovascular disease, etc., and type 2 diabetes. And in terms of so someone else could take this on and run with it and see if we, I have no idea what impact this would have on medical challenges. Yeah, definitely. So, I'm going through a pretty stressful period of time right now. I would eat fairly healthily. I have my greens in every day. I get my berries, my beans, seeds, and nuts.
Are you getting fish?
I get fish, but I supplement with a high dose omega-3 because I don't think I eat enough fish.
Twice a week.
It's quite hard to get it all in. And even for the fish that I am consuming, they're not always the high omega-3 fish. So I did the calculation and I had to eat like a whopping amount of sardines. So I take my fish oil every day. I take vitamin D3 and K2 because I know my vitamin D level is low. I don't really take anything else. I take a B vitamin complex.
You're like the perfect candidate.
But, I'm fairly sleep deprived.
Yes,
I've got an
but I
11-month
know,
old.
but we can't do much about the
Yeah, we
11-month
can't do
year
that.
old.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
know.
And we've got all these other things. I mean, like, would this be something? I mean, put your researcher
Yes.
hat to one side and your
Yes.
clinical hat to one side. Like, talking to me as a friend.
Yes.
Do you think there may be some benefits for someone like myself?
Well, I guess I'd
taking
ask you. I
multinutrients?
mean, the B complex is the one that's most studied for stress, and so if that's your biggest challenge, then I'd say, does it work?
I don't know.
Well, okay, so
I haven't come off it in like a couple of years, so I wouldn't know. Maybe
well,
if I
well,
was
you know if you were not stressed. So
oh, I'm definitely stressed.
okay, well, then I mean, if it's working for you, you shouldn't actually get super stressed if it's working. And so, our experience, again, sorry, going back to data, is that when people are taking the nutrients and then they experience stressful events. So we had ongoing earthquakes.
Right.
So we've monitored people taking the nutrients through that. They were not getting very stressed by those events. So that would be what I'd say is if you're taking these nutrients and you're not super stressed, like getting stressed and getting sad are normal parts of life. So I am not here to eliminate those experiences and emotions because they're there to tell you something.
Yeah, of course.
But the extremes are what I think could easily be dampened down by a micronutrient supplement. So people who take them at those doses that I'm telling you will report that they are not feeling like they just roll with the punches and they sort of just things come along and they just manage it and their sleep is really good. But I'm not going to be able to change your sleep because that's an external factor and you just need that child to get to 5 and go to school and then maybe things will be better.
Yeah.
Maybe not till 5, but maybe earlier than that. So I lived. I mean, you're treading water when
I'm hearing that I should probably try it.
Well, I mean, the benefits for health. Like, you're probably a pretty healthy guy.
I am generally
I'm assuming,
a very healthy
like, not
person,
you don't fall over with flu and colds and
I
things
do get
like that.
flu. I do get colds regularly, and I put that down to my stress levels.
Right. So you could give it a go. I guess I don't want to give you any guarantees.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Because I mean,
do you take? What's your supplement?
I take 4 a day.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I've been doing that only because of data. So after the earthquake, and we had these incredible studies. We had the data showed that our PTSD symptoms reduced PTSD symptoms were reduced from 65% down to 19% with 4 weeks of that intervention. Okay. And this was after the February earthquake. So we did the intervention after that big earthquake. And so when you see things like that, where your probable levels of PTSD are reducing like that, the stress levels were going down into the normal non-clinical range, I would be foolish as a researcher not to trust my data because I know how they've been collected. I'm as stressed as everybody else. It was a terrible time. And as soon as I started to take that 4 a day, and that was the dose we were using in those studies, I have had now almost 15 years. I've been regulated in my emotions. I don't get stressed very often. It does happen, but there are kinds of things that come my way, those constant rejections of journal,
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I might get upset for a little bit and then I just rise to the occasion. Okay, I've got to keep going. I mean, if you look at my career and how hard it's been, you have to be resilient. And so what was it about it? I'm sure I have some kind of genetic predisposition. There's other things that are there that make me persevere when times are really, really tough. But I also think there must be some benefit to being well nourished. And it's not just nutrients. I mean, I eat well as well. So it's a good diet. And I don't get sick. I mean, that's the thing. That's the surprising one for me is that if I look back and I think, when was the last time I was really sick? Was 2015.
Really?
I didn't get COVID. I was so exposed to COVID. I was going back and forth because both of my parents died during that time. And I was coming to the UK, which was rampant with COVID each time I came over here. And so I've had a lot of exposure, airplanes, whatever. I haven't avoided it, but I've been tested 1,000 times. So.
Wow. Okay.
So
you're convincing me, Julia.
I don't know. I mean, but I'm just an N of one.
Yeah,
so,
no, totally.
But I wish I'd taken it. I certainly wish I'd taken it during pregnancy when I see the benefits I would have had.
Yeah.
And I also wish I'd taken it when my kids were that young, because I wasn't, like when they were in that 0 to 5. I didn't know about this research. Really, I was only starting to do this research then. But when you're sick all the time because they bring everything home, I don't know if it would have addressed that, but I felt like I was sick for 5 years.
Wow.
When your kids are young.
Wow.
Would it help that? I guess if it did, I think we'd have everybody kind of excited about it.
In fact, I think you should do another study where you look at parents taking multivitamins between the ages of newborns or their new kids between like 0 and 5.
Exactly.
And see what the number of colds is.
I know, exactly.
number of viruses.
And we're going to follow these kids who were exposed to the micronutrients in pregnancy. So it'll be interesting. We're just doing the 5-year data now on them. So we'll find out. If we show that they're just no different from other kids, that's a win, right? Because they should have started life on a back foot because mom was depressed.
Yeah.
So so that's it's not a regular multivitamin that you buy in the supermarket. You do need to buy them through the companies and online, and it's not available in your supermarket. And again, it's just one product. I'd love it if there were others that could use the doses that are being used. Even at 4 pills a day, you're getting a much higher dose of your B vitamins, of your vitamin D, of all those minerals.
And there's nothing special about these vitamins. No. They're all synthetic, I'm assuming.
A lot of them are synthetic because they have to be.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't not put them in their natural form easily. So some of them are going to be synthetic. So there's nothing special about them. Well, one of the things that's probably special about them is just how they're chelated. So how minerals are chelated so that they can pass through the gut brain, the gut barrier, more easily, because a lot of things will just go through you, and that's why often you hear about the expensive urine. And I can certainly challenge that. One of the studies that we did. Sorry, I feel like I could talk. I can talk about this forever, but I feel like your podcast has to end at some point. But we looked at microbiome. I sort of alluded to that earlier.
Yeah.
And we got samples of kids with ADHD before and after the exposure to micronutrients or placebo. And we also did this for the women during pregnancy. And what we found was that the diversity of the bacteria and the microbiome increased. And we generally know that that's a good thing. We don't know why, how did that happen? But that's a possible clue as to the benefits in the brain. If you're improving the microbiome diversity, are we then having those positive impacts? We don't know 100%, but that's one of the mechanisms. So when people say to me expensive urine, I go, well, we've shown that the nutrient levels goes up. We've done imaging studies where we show that there's, these really subtle benefits in connectivity in the brain. We've shown it improves methylation, something we were talking about before. We've shown, decreases in homocysteine go right down. We documented that with the women during pregnancy, which we know is a good thing because that's a good indicator that the methylation cycle is working and you get reduction in inflammation. So there's all these indicators of biological indicators that something's happening.
Yeah.
So I think it's like all over the system that we're seeing benefit. We did start a study on mitochondria to see if we were improving the mitochondria, but that is something, maybe a pandemic might have happened. I don't know. Something happened and we couldn't finish that. But we really have tried to explore the biological mechanisms as best as we can with our limited funding.
That's incredible. Do let me know if you do the mitochondrial one. I think I was alluding to that a little bit earlier.
Yeah, you were. Yeah, so no, we didn't end up with any insights on that one. I think the machine broke down or something. It was one of those really, things happen sometimes in research. Yeah.
Julia, you're incredible. I just love the energy and the enthusiasm you bring to your work and your integrity as well. And the fact that, you're just you're doing it for the right reasons. I can tell. You know, your intentions are pure, and your energy is just infectious. So I really appreciate you coming on and sharing all your knowledge.
Well, I feel really honored to be here. I'm just so fortunate to be in London and be able to do this, and that you are willing to talk to me for this amount of time. So
of course,
I'm always thrilled. And as you can tell, as soon as somebody lets me talk, it's hard to shut me up. So, you know, I'm glad we didn't have like a, you know, we had to stick to an hour, and then I'd have to shut up and go away.
No.
And I love that we just went all over the place. And
I love it.
And didn't even touch on any of the questions that you said.
We'll have to do a part 2, I'm sure. We're probably going to have loads of questions from our listeners. But yeah, we'll do a part 2 for sure. But appreciate you coming in.
Okay. My pleasure.
Thank you
My
so
pleasure.
much. If you loved that episode, you will love the full library of podcasts from the Doctor's Kitchen Library. We talk about everything from inflammation, supplements, and food as medicine. Just like this episode right here. You can click it right now and check it out.